Truth Bombers Podcast.
Truth Bombers Podcast.
The group chat turned podcast with your hosts, Russ, Lockie, and BJ.
Benny,
Hey, dude.
good mate. How are you?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. Just the two of us tonight.
Sweet. You're just taking turns between me and Russ.
Between the two of you, I'm getting some accrued leave here, mate. Got a couple episodes up my sleeve. I should be able to do that anytime.
All right, I'll take over for a sesh.
He's got the spicy cough, finally.
Oh, no good.
Yeah. So hopefully he's doing all right. Russ, you better be listening, better be watching now that you got a few days at home, doing not much, but catching up on some old episodes. So
Absolutely.
how are you, mate?
Yeah, I'm good. Very well.
How are you feeling about tomorrow night against the Saints?
I think I'm ready to get my hopes up and for them to be dashed again.
So the team that we beat by 75 points last year, we finally get a crack at, and we'll see just how far we're falling off in 12 months of football.
Yeah.
Let's jump straight into it, mate. We've got a debutant this week in and amongst the ins with Massimo D'Ambrosio making his debut. Just snuck in ahead of Tom Hurd, which there were some rumors circulating that he might make his debut. We might be on the cusp. Old mate Russ will not be happy if that occurs. Braden Ham named as a big in this week, and Andrew McGuire is back. Obviously, Dusty Parish and that calf that he sustained, or that knock that he sustained in the first quarter against the Blues last week, he did not get up. I think he had a fitness test today. Waterman's been dropped, Cutler's been dropped, and Zach Reed, like another interesting out as well. Not that he's been great, but thought he, in terms of like getting some experience and stuff like that, he's probably one that you keep back there.
Yeah. Do we want to go through the entire team or first thoughts? What are we thinking?
Yeah, I'll go through the entire team and then we can just chat it back if you want. We'll start with the fullbacks: Jake Kelly, Jordan Ridley, and Jaden Laverde. Mason Redmond. Dyson Heppel makes his regression from the wing back to centre half back. Nick Hind on the other flank. Nick Martin, Zach Merritt, and Andrew McGrath named on a wing as he comes back, like we said, from that groin. Archie Perkins, Matt Guelphy, and Massimo D'Ambrosio named on the forward flank. Typical Essendon move in bringing in a half-back, an elite half-back, and throwing them in at half-forward. And Stringer, Peter Wright, Harrison Jones as our full forward line. Draper named as our number one ruck with Shield and Durham in the guts. So a bit of a step up for Sammy Boy, who's been playing pretty well. And then our bench: Braden Ham, Jack Caldwell, Ben Hobbs, and Flip. Stewart, Zerk Thatcher, Waterman, and Cutler named as our emergencies.
Let's talk about the outs. I think Reed had been, I shouldn't say poor, but underperforming for a few weeks. And I like that they gave him a number of games in a row, but I don't mind the dropping. I think we've talked about this earlier in the season. I think if you give a youngster a few games in a row and they're not quite performing certain roles for the team, I don't see a problem with dropping them to the VFL. Maybe he needs to work on his engine a little bit more. Like, I don't think he was getting to enough contests. Maybe it's just get a bit more confidence with your intercepting or your body work at VFL level, then come back in. So I don't mind that. In terms of Cutler, I think he's just a player that's always going to be in our fringe sort of players. If we have a few injuries, he might come in. Otherwise, I don't think he's in our best 22 long-term. Parrish obviously injured, a bit of a shame, but it'd be good to see someone else get a little bit more roll time through the middle. The ins. Ham was, a very interesting one for me. He's just a running machine. And that's what I've always thought. He's just very, very fit. He looks good at a VFL level, but I've always felt like he hasn't quite been up for it, especially contest work in the AFL system. So that was an interesting one to me. But love seeing the debutant, Massimo.
Yeah, I thought Stewart might actually come straight in and get the job on Big Boy King. Bigger body. He's been named as an emergency, so who knows? But I'm looking at our back line again. Like, who goes to King? Laverde has to be, right?
Well, he played on him in the preseason, and maybe it's just like we need you to rough him up, because if he gets a run and a leap at it, he's just way too big. Like, in terms of height wise, he would have 4 to 6 inches on Laverde or Ridley or any of those guys in our back line. Like, Reed was our tallest. So we are a little bit undersized there. But maybe you just say Laverde, play one-on-one, be a bit of a mongrel and shut him out of the game that way.
Do you think Waterman gets the Medi-sub role again this week?
It's a strange one for me, because I don't think he can play lots of roles. I think he can play as a half forward, and that's about it. So I'd rather a player with a little bit more versatility. But they seem to want him in that role last weekend, so it's hard to know.
I'm still surprised that Tex doesn't get the call up to be the Medi-sub. Massimo D'Ambrosio, at least he's been named on the ground, so we're not going to have another situation where a debutant doesn't actually get on the field as part of their debut. Thoughts on pushing him to half back, where he's been playing all his footy, where he's killed it in the VFL last week, and taking Heppel out and putting him at half forward just to put him somewhere?
I don't mind it. I'll throw another name at you, Hind. I think Hind can push forward, and he could be that little live wire forward pocket. He did play that role at St Kilda, so it's not like he's never done it before. Or at least you could push him a little bit more on the wing and see if his run and dash can create some opportunities for us.
There was just a stat, actually, speaking of Nick Hind. I don't know if you caught it in the second quarter there, the Carlton-Richmond game. It's got the lead tally for bounces had, and Nick Hind's actually coming second, which we talk about someone who hasn't had kind of the impact or seemed to have been breaking and running lines as much this year as he has last year. Still coming second in the league for running bounces. Second, of course, to Adam Sard, right, who we lost in that exact position. And like, I think there was Adam Sard's at like 70 odd, and then Hind is in second at like 27 or something like that. So definitely not having the year that he had last year, but probably doing maybe a little bit more than we realize. But I guess bounces aren't necessarily an inference on what you do with the ball once you get rid of it, right?
Yeah.
Sammy Durham, do you reckon that's a bit of a promotion? Parrish in, Durham out, sort of similar, like for like, goes pretty hard, decent engine on him, throw him in there, see what he can do?
No, I think he's better as a winger that maybe comes up to stoppages, depends where they are around the ground. I don't think some of those players where they've been named, that's where they'll start. So, like, for my mind, you go Merritt, Shield, probably McGrath in the guts. Caldwell can run through there. They seem to not mind Hobbs getting a little bit more roll through there. Maybe a Perkins. I can't see Durham going into a centre bounce, and hopefully Stringer, little bit of match fitness after his one game. He's attends a few more centre bounces.
I was not harsh on Stringer, but like obviously had a bit to say on Tuesday's episode of the podcast, just in terms of a review of his game. Since then, I've watched the first crack that the boys did on Ruttons press conference. Super interesting. Like, I think it was David King or maybe it was Ben Dixon actually talking about it. And what he was like, Ruttons come out and being like, yeah, you know, Jake's had a really poor game and we expect more from LA, and just like really throwing him under the bus in a year where like he has not been prepared to throw any senior players under the bus, but it's okay when it's like Jake Stringer. I thought that was pretty stiff. We only went to him 4 times the whole game. Like, how much impact do you expect him to have? And it's only like his 3rd game for the year, in between like, pretty decent hamstrings if you're missing 7 or 8 weeks at a time. I don't know, man. Like for all the carry on with the Dyson Heppel and the culture and the support and everything else, I think what you do internally is very different to what you do externally. And like Dicko said, if you want to challenge him on his standards and what he's doing, do that. Like, you don't air your family laundry out in public. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I thought it was a very, very interesting press conference to watch in its full capacity.
Yeah. In my head with Stringer, and we talked about this yesterday, I think you've got to give him a few days in a row and then you can judge him harshly. I think he's a player that really needs some continuity with playing, and it doesn't matter how well he's training. If he doesn't get a few games under his belt, he's not going to be a first up player that's going to tear it up in game one. And in terms of Rodden's comments, the only thing I can think of is now that we've got most of our players back. So in the VFL, Langford's coming back, Snelling's coming back. We've pretty much got a full list to pick from. Maybe he feels like now we've actually got enough VFL talent running around that he can be a little bit harsher with the senior players. And maybe if it had been a Shield earlier in the year with all the guys we've got running around the VFL, then he would have been harder on Shield in a press conference. Yeah. So I'd like to think that that's the case rather than just he's picked on one player when there's half a dozen senior players we could talk about almost weekly that probably aren't really holding up the standards.
Yeah, start with your captain. You want to hold anyone to the highest standard, why don't you start with Dyson Heppel and the shit year he's had, right? Yeah, that one bemused me a little bit. Sammy Draper, I don't really say like he's done enough to actually warrant getting that number one ruck position. I think Phillips, in terms of what he's doing, hit outs wise, first the ball, giving us first use, and also the amount of direction he gives. He's not necessarily a player that's played 200 games, but he's been in the system long enough that if he'd been getting these 20 games a year, he probably would have. And he still has a level of experience that doesn't normally come with a sub 100 game player. And I think that was evidence against Carlton. His directional talk, like he's starting to step up a little bit more too. I'm surprised given what he's been doing that you wouldn't just let him continue to do that.
Yeah. It'll be a big week for both of them. Paddy Ryder and Marshall. They're a tough 1-2 combo. Probably the second best in the comp behind Gawn and Jackson. So, yeah, it'll be a big game for both of them. I think they'll play fairly 50-50 in terms of the centre bounces.
Who do you need to see this week have a blinder? Who's the one bloke on the field that you're like, if he has a blinder, we're going to be in good shape? Or you just want to see have a blinder just for the sake of having a blinder? Stringer?
There's a few players. Stringer, I'd like to see just an improvement on last week, get a little bit more involved. Merritt had a very poor game. By his standards, I think this has been a very average season for him. Dylan Shield, I want to see him back it up. He had a great game versus Blues. Can he do it 2 weeks in a row, which we expect of senior players? So for me, it's all in the midfield. And Wright maybe has a little bit of a kick up the bum where he's had a few quiet weeks, which I think is so much how we've delivered the ball to him. Like sometimes we're just kicking it over his head. He's got no chance, or we're kicking at his feet. Like, we're not giving him good delivery, but you've still got to get yourself involved. And there was a couple of times versus Carlton where he just dropped a mark and it would have been a guaranteed goal. And it's just like, okay, if you're a little bit out of form, you've just got to get those easy ones. And then the hard ones, the pack marks, the shots from outside 50, they'll come on your good days. But you've always got to have the bare minimum of a goal or two, I feel, for a key forward.
Yeah, I think the same. I think the Stringer and Wright both in the same bracket of like, if they can kick a goal in the first quarter and get themselves up and about, that's what will get them to that next level, put in that effort. And, if they kick a second goal in that first quarter, you almost start to think, we're almost a chance of winning here purely because Peter Wright in particular is now just going to start clunking absolutely everything,
Yeah.
He for me is someone that I want to see, or even a Harry Jones. I want to see one of those big targets actually kick 4 or 5, not just like 1 or 2. I thought Harry Jones actually last week was very impressive, particularly given the conditions. So I'd love to see him, what's the forecast for tomorrow? Is it as bad as it is tonight?
I haven't checked yet.
Hopefully I'd say Marvel anyway, right? So it's not gonna. It might be a bit like a bit soapy, but it's obviously not going to be as crazy conditions as it would be at the G. But hopefully, it gives him the opportunity to run and jump, and even just for his level of confidence in general of getting back and kicking a third goal, right? Like a mini bag, a half bag, and just being able to sort of say like, I'm back, like the injury's behind me. I'm getting a little bit of momentum, and off we go. You touched on it as well just before. Langford is doing unrestricted minutes in the VFL this week, which if he gets through, I would assume he comes straight back in next week. Snelling still on restricted minutes. And some talk from, is it Sean Murphy? Is that his name? Our high performance. About progression of Michael Hurley. He's still named as like indefinite, but he's going to resume running with the main group in the next 4 weeks or so. TikTok, man. Like, if it's round 15 and we're still indefinite in 4 weeks' time, like, you want to give him a goodbye game just for the sentimental and emotional side of things. But like, do you name him as Medisub so he gets the game and potentially doesn't need to come on?
Well, honestly, with where we are, like, I would give him a game.
Playing against the Kangaroos.
Well, at the end of the day, aren't we? We're tanking for that third pick,
which we're going to trade and get 250 game players from a club that's actually going out and doing what we want to do. That's what I would do. That's what I'm
well,
thinking.
I was thinking about your conversation the other day, and like you'd like to pick up an experienced player from a Geelong, a Sydney, Richmond, a team that's had very, very high standards for a number of years and success, and see if they can, impart some of their standards, their culture effectively on the squad.
Yeah. Completely agree. Would love to see Dylan Shield back it up. 10 tackles. That's what I want to see. Like for me, looking at stats these days, like that's the one I'm checking by in terms of like who I think is having a good game. I'm not even looking at disposals. It's tackles. I want to see your work rate. And I was unlucky last week. You know, we had 19 tackles inside 50, which is almost more than we had against Freo, you know?
Yeah.
So I think it's nice to see potentially some progression there. And hopefully that continues. And at least if you've got some stats or some numbers or some metrics like that you can start to see, you know, moving in the right direction, even if you lose the game, at least there's some sort of improvement. There's something to be like, okay, we're finally moving, you know, in the right direction, whether that be work rate or intent or pressure. And similarly to last week, you know, only one scoring opportunity between the two teams. So you kind of mark that one down as you lost by 4 or 5 goals, but that was a very gettable game potentially. You take, you know, capitalize. I mean, if it's capitalizing, if it's only that last like conversion that we're kind of breaking down, otherwise we're winning games, like that's, for me, that's a tick. Like that's a pretty big tick this year, which is still pathetic, right?
Well, here's the thing. Sydney, we had the lowest pressure rating ever recorded since Champion Data, I think, started recording it with like the 18 team league. Since that game, I think we have had good standards in that area. So against Richmond, against Carlton, against Port Adelaide, I feel like we've showed up and there's been very good effort. But we've talked about this. That's just AFL football. That's just the bare minimum. That's just playing AFL football.
Yeah.
And what's disappointing me is we still haven't really looked like we're able to stop the opposition moving the ball from their defensive 50 into their forward 50. And our ball movement is struggling as well.
I'd love to see what actually constitutes a tackle. You know, if someone's kind of running through and it's like a stand up hold and they kind of get rid of it, but it's not necessarily like a real, you know, like pile driving into the ground, completely dispossessing the player. Because then there's obviously like there's tackling, which like you get on the score sheet, and there's tackling that brings like inferred pressure to the contest and starts to actually create fumbles and all the rest of it, right? So, and I can't remember Dylan Shield really rubbing anyone like all the way down into the dirt and giving them one on the way up. So
that's what we miss Wallace so much. He would either chase down from behind and it'd be a holding the ball, or if it was just a regular tackle, he drove him into the ground.
Yeah.
And like for a small guy, he was just such a ball of energy and muscle. And we just don't have those sort of players. So I think he's been such a loss in that sort of department.
I think that too is like an attitude, it is like a mindset, like it's a culture, like it's not necessarily like you want to go out and hurt someone, but like to bring aggression and presence and size to a contest is something that we haven't seen all year. And that's probably why you can win a tackle count by 20 or 25, but still lose uncontested possession by like 40 or 50, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, yeah, you're tackling, but no one's really worried and you're still not winning the ball. Any final thoughts on the team?
No, covered.
Key matchup, Laverde and King. King gets a hold of us, it's game over.
Yeah, if he kicks if he kicks a goal, I think we lose.
They lost three pretty decent players last week.
Well, I've heard that Jones has been named.
Has he?
So he had a hamstring complaint, but they said he's been named. I have to double check that. I had a couple out with the concussion.
Yeah.
But it was a young kid and a fringe player. It wasn't like a top 5 best and fairest player. And
still no steal.
Yeah, which is
good for us. I hate sitting here and being like, oh, they've got some key outs. We might be a chance. Moving on to greener pastures and Essendon teams that get around and actually win games. The girls smashed Hawthorn in the first qualifying final last week, 60-7. So they have a semi-final this Sunday against Casey, which from memory were also undefeated when we played them. And it was one of the closer games for the year, but we got up. So semi-final time.
Exciting.
Yeah. Footy tips?
Is it our lock of the week?
You had a stinker last week, mate. Who'd you choose? You had Port. Was it Port you had?
I went Port over Richmond, which it was just a calculated risk and obviously got it wrong.
And we've both gone the Tigers, which looks okay at the moment, but Blues are starting to build a little bit. Who have you got this week? Who's your lock?
I think there's a few like just very easy games, and then there's 3 that are very, very hard. I'll go a slightly risky pick. Dogs over Giants.
Yeah, I was going to go that one as well. I'll go Gold Coast over Adelaide. I think the Gold Coast have done a lot this year, but they have
$1.19 favourites. You'll take a risk.
Hang on. I wasn't even looking at the actual odds.
That's all right, mate. You do what you got to do.
Well, Russ has got Geelong over West Coast.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Let's have a look here. Sydney Port will be a good game too.
Yeah, I'm tossing up with that one.
I'm surprised actually the Dogs are only paying probably because it's at Giants, but they've looked okay. Do you think they make the 8?
I don't think so. I think there's quite a bit of competition for that. So like Richmond, if they win tonight, they get into that 8th spot, I believe. They take Collingwood's spot in the 8. Like it's pretty tight, that sort of 7th to 12th almost. Like Gold Coast, Port, Dogs, they're all outside at the moment, but they're like knocking on the door. Yeah.
I'm going to take Sydney over Adelaide or over Port in Port.
Yep. I like it.
Lovely. All right, buddy.
All right. VFL, the boys have won 2 games in a row.
They beat Carlton.
Yeah. We're crawling from very bottom on the ladder to maybe second last.
It's this year has highlighted more than any, right? The difference between VFL and AFL in terms of standard, but the stronger your 2s, the stronger your 1s, and obviously we've decimated the 2s like to fill the 1s, but both teams just like there's not much joy going on at Windy Hill. It's been an interesting offseason, man. Like we came back last year early, like pretty ready to get back into it, and like if we're going to do that last year after a good year looking to build, like there better be no break at the end of this year. Yeah, you better be like have the weekend off and we'll see you Monday. And even if it's 2 or 3 weeks off conditioning, we're watching tape nonstop, get this bloody defense right and get this zone figured out. Because this has not been the most motivating year to like start a podcast.
Absolutely not. Do you think in the off season they try something quite drastic different, or do you think they try to knuckle down on what they're obviously trying to do that we haven't just been able to execute well this season?
I don't know what the deal is when you appoint a head coach and you accept that game plan. Do you let things run their course? How, like, at what point do you say it's either the coaching or it's the game plan? And I guess as outsiders, like, we don't know, because they're never going to come out and say it's because of the players we've had to play, because of the injuries we've had, that we just haven't been able to like get this done, you know? But I think, you know, like we sort of said, there were signs of this last year. It's just that these high scoring games, we were winning. So you don't worry too much about conceding 110 points if you can score 125, you know? So yeah, I don't know. What do you think? It's the list, or do you think it's the plan, or do you think it's a bit of both?
I read an interesting thing earlier today, and it was sort of like, imagine the team with Sard still in, Danaher still in, McKenna still in, like these players that we've lost over the last sort of 3 years. Do we just have such a deeper list? Is our performance so much better because of those key players, or not? We've got a lot of kids, a lot of inexperience, so you've really got to just give them time. But it's frustrating to see teams that I don't think are that far advanced in terms of experience or age or talent performing so much better than we are this year.
Yeah, I don't know, but I don't know how long you've got as Ben Rutten to like, I think there's a, you know, like there might be, hey, ultimately this is the team defense that we want to play and we're going to keep working on it. But until we're at the point where you can do it, like we're going to have to adapt the game plan to the players that we've got or the list that we've got and the age that they are, you know? I think the other thing too is when you're playing guys that have only been in the system, the AFL system, for a couple of years, it takes time, number one, to like obviously, you know, learn the plays and things like that, but to build up a level of conditioning that you can sustain a level of effort over an extended period of time. And it, you know, you come in as a fit 18-year-old, it's very rare that you know you're going to be able to run out 22 games. Like it doesn't happen very often. So there's obviously like a level on the physical side that comes with what it means to be a 50 game player now. Like, okay, you've been pretty consistent for 3 or 4 years. You should have the legs, the knowledge, the know-how. Your body's hardened up a bit. You've matured physically a little bit more. So maybe once we have a backline where blokes aren't weighing 68 kilos at 6'3", maybe that defense really does solidify. And you know, if Zach Reed in 2 years' time can have a physique like Stephen May, then it's probably not necessarily too much that the game plan changes. It's just that they're able to execute those one-on-ones a little bit more, or, you know, kind of gather a little bit more and go from there. So fuck, who'd want to be a head coach? Like you know, like what do you kind of got, I think it's definitely got to be an art between, well, this is the style that we want to play, but this is the list that we have. Where's like the middle ground between getting the list that we have to a position where they can actually execute at least the groundings of what we're trying to see or what we're trying to do. Yeah. Even offensively though, like we've talked a lot about defense, but like, it's just, there's no like excitement going forward. It's like we get burnt going forward. Like, where the fuck are our players? We go forward, there's no one ahead of the ball, but then we turn it over and there's no one, like there's opposition out the back. So are we just hanging out in the middle of the ground, like caught out both ends, you know?
Yeah. And that's what it looks like. It looks like we don't get into the best position going forward. And as soon as we turn it over, going in the opposite direction, we're just like the amount of times that Kerner and Mackay were in free space on the last weekend, it was sort of like how are these guys in space? They're big key forwards. Like you can't tell me that we didn't do our homework and we're like, let's shut these players out. Like, don't let them get near the football. And it's like, oh, they have 20 meters of space free. That's just like poor application of the zone, or like such a loose interpretation of what we're trying to do that it's not working.
I would almost want to see like, okay, we're going to play a 16-man zone, and with the other two, like Laverde, you're just going to play on King and that's it. Like, don't zone off. Don't worry about guarding space. Like, we're already the easiest team to move the ball against. So you're obviously not going to make an impact on that front. Just go and stand near King and just like pinch him and punch him and give him ear massage all day long, like get into him. And then Phillips or Draper, whoever's rucking at the time, do the same thing to Ryder. Don't worry about like where you're setting up, because our setup doesn't work. Just run with like some of those key movement players. And the very worst for Draper, like spend the afternoon learning off one of like the best in the competition about where to be, you know, and where's effective to go and run around and how he moves and why, you know.
Great.
We're front runners, man. If we can kick 3 or 4 goals instead of 3 or 4 points in the first 10 or 15 minutes, then we probably will win, because that's what gets us up and about.
We're front runners that we just haven't hit the front this season.
Yeah, it's honestly, don't you think? Like it's the truth, you know. If we kick 3 or 4 goals instead of 3 or 4 points, everyone's up and about. But you kick 3 points to 2 goals, and it's like, oh fuck, here we go again. You know, heads drop, right?
Yeah, I think if we had won more games this year, we would have had more wins for the year.
I think so too. If we could kick more goals, we'd win more games. Yeah. All right. Let's leave it on that note, shall we? What are your plans tomorrow night? You got much on? You're gonna
after I finish work, nothing on.
Easy. Lovely, mate. All right. Go Bombers.
Gotcha.